Well, hello everybody, welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to be making a cottage loaf. This is a loaf which is formed from two balls of dough, one larger one with a smaller one on the top. It's quite straightforward, but it takes a bit of time because you have to allow the dough to prove after you've kneaded it and such like. But we'll get straight on with it. And for the ingredients, I have 500 grams of flour, which is 4 cups. Now for that I have 400 grams of strong white bread flour, which is about 3 1/4 cups, and I have 100 grams, about 3/4 of a cup, of plain wholemeal flour. I also have 25 grams, just under 2 tablespoons of butter, which is at room temperature, half a teaspoon of salt, and 7 grams, 1 packet of instant yeast. And then I have 300 millilitres, which is a cup and a quarter of lukewarm water. So the first thing I'm going to do is to put the salt and the plain flour into the strong white bread flour, and I should say I'm going to do this all by hand because I'm trying this new Danish dough whisk which I've bought, to see how that works. So having mixed the flours and the salt together, I'm going to sprinkle over the yeast as well, and then I'm going to drop the butter in. I've cubed this into little cubes, so that it can get mixed in quite easily. I'm just going to give that a bit of a mix like that to coat that butter, and then I'm going to pour in my water, and I'm going to simply mix this around until I get a nice stiff sticky dough. And I'm going to scrape it off from time to time and carry on mixing just for a minute or two like this. And then what I did was I used my little plastic scraper here just to pull that all together into one mass. And I'm going to put that onto the counter without flouring it. I will use a little bit of flour later on. I'm going to knead this for 8 minutes. And if it sticks at all, I will simply scrape, because some of the butter may come out, I will simply scrape it back in with my scraper like this, and I'm going to knead that for a good 8 minutes. So I've kneaded that now for 8 minutes, and it's actually quite nice. So what I'm going to do is take just the very lightest sprinkling of flour, and I'm going to form this into a ball by pulling it over on itself like that. And then I'm going to put that back into the bowl that I used for mixing, and I'm just going to dust the top with a little bit of flour, and I'm going to cover that with a clean towel, and I'm going to leave it to prove for 60 to 90 minutes. Depending on the temperature of the room, it will take longer. So when it has puffed up quite nicely, I'll come back and we'll go on to the next stage. The dough has rested and proved now for 90 minutes, and as you can see, it's growing quite nicely. So what I'm going to do is just lightly flour the work surface and tip this out, and then I'm just going to knock it down to get the air out of it, like that. And I'm just going to weigh that, and I have 815 grams, so I want to divide that by 3, so I can get 1/3 and 2/3. I want 271 grams for one piece. That's okay. And that leaves me with 542 grams So it's 271.5 grams in fact, just over. So then what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to flatten the larger piece, and I'm going to take the top side here and pull it down to just shy of the edge and press it down, and then turn it 45 degrees and do the same. And I'm going to keep doing this until it's a nice firm ball. And that looks quite firm. So then what I'm going to do is take the edges of my hands and I'm going to pump that around like that, until I have my ball. I'll put that to one side for a minute and do the same with the smaller piece. and then do this again. So now I have my 2 balls of dough, and what I have here is my baking tray with parchment paper. So I take the parchment paper and put the large ball on there, and I want to put this smaller ball on the top as exactly in the centre as I possibly can, like that. And then I'm going to dust the whole of that with some flour. And with that, like that, the idea is to poke a thumb or a finger into the centre and go all the way through to the work surface. But I'm actually going to do it with the handle of my dough hook, of my dough whisk. Like that. And then with that, like that, I'm going to put it onto my baking tray, and I'm going to cover it again and leave it for 30 minutes. And then I'll come back in 30 minutes and we'll go on and score the sides and heat our oven, and we'll bake it. So it's been 30 minutes that I've had this covered up. So what I'm going to do, I have my oven now, and I'm preheating that to 220 Celsius, that's 200 Celsius with a fan, which is 430 Fahrenheit. And I've put a roasting tray on the bottom of the oven, or the bottom shelf in fact, so that I can pour some boiling water into that once the bread goes into the oven. So I have some water, well, I will have some water boiled ready to go into that tray once this goes in the oven. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to score this now with a very sharp knife or a razor blade, and I'm just going to try to cut some scores in all the way around on the top. So I'm now going to leave that on my baking tray like that while the oven preheats, and that's going to take 15-20 minutes. And then once it's preheated, I'm going to put it into the oven, pour half an inch of boiling water into the roasting tray, and I'm going to bake for 20 minutes. And then I'm going to turn the oven down to 190 Celsius, that's 170 Celsius with a fan, 375 Fahrenheit, and bake it for another 15 to 20 minutes. And I will test it by tapping the bottom of the loaf, and if it's hollow, it's ready to come out. I'll take it out and let it cool down, and then I'll come back and show you the results, and we'll slice it. I baked the cottage loaf for 20 minutes, then I reduced the heat as I had mentioned and baked it for a further 18 minutes, and it sounded hollow when I tapped it on the underside. So I took it out, I've let it cool down, and this is what it looks like. It's not perfectly symmetrical, but it's good enough, I'm sure, for a first attempt. So I'm just going to cut a bit of the bottom part. And there you can see it, and it's got the nice crusty outside and soft inside. Usually I would put butter on that, but I just have a quick taste like this. So it's a very simple loaf to make, does take a little bit of time. It's got a nice unusual shape. It's ideal for cutting in for soup or for sandwiches and such like. So I hope you've enjoyed this recipe, and if you have, give me the thumbs up below the video and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for the recipe, and I'll put a link below the video as well. And then I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.